Recognition is a quiet force, often misunderstood because it does not announce itself with intensity or spectacle. It does not rely on charm, flattery, or the fleeting intoxication of admiration. Admiration looks upward. It places someone at a distance, often idealized, sometimes distorted. It is drawn to what appears exceptional, polished, or desirable. But recognition moves differently. It does not elevate or diminish, it meets. To be recognized is to be encountered without illusion. It is when another person perceives not only the surface you have learned to present, but also the subtle undercurrents beneath it, the tensions you carry, the contradictions you wrestle with, the unspoken truths you rarely reveal. It is an awareness that penetrates beyond roles and masks, reaching something essential and unguarded. Admiration can exist without understanding. It may even depend on misunderstanding, because it thrives on projection. One sees what one wants to see, what one needs to see. Recognition, however, cannot exist without presence. It demands attention, a kind of psychological stillness, where the observer is not imposing meaning, but discovering it. In that space, there is no need to exaggerate or perform. When someone admires you, there is often an invisible pressure to maintain the image they have formed. You become responsible for preserving their perception, even if it no longer reflects who you truly are. Recognition removes this burden. It does not ask you to remain consistent with an idea. It allows you to remain honest with your reality. There is freedom in that, an unsettling freedom, because it leaves no place to hide, but also no need to pretend. Recognition also carries a certain weight, because it reveals aspects of yourself you may have avoided. To be truly seen is not always comfortable. It can stir resistance, even fear, because it disrupts the narratives you have built to protect yourself. Yet within that discomfort lies something profoundly stabilizing. You are no longer grasping for validation based on appearance or achievement. You are being met at a level where those things are secondary. There is also a mutuality in recognition. It is not one-sided, not hierarchical. It arises when two individuals are willing, consciously or unconsciously, to encounter each other without excessive defense. In that exchange, something real begins to form, not an attachment based on need or fantasy, but a connection rooted in awareness. Where admiration often fades as imperfections emerge, recognition deepens. It adapts because it was never dependent on an illusion of flawlessness. It makes space for growth, for change, for complexity. It does not cling to who you were at your best moment. It remains present with who you are in your becoming. In this sense, recognition is not merely a component of love, it is one of its foundations. Without it, love risks becoming conditional, fragile, easily shaken by the realities of human nature. With it, love gains depth, resilience, and a kind of quiet truth that does not need constant reassurance. True love does not turn away from what is difficult to witness. It does not cling only to what is pleasing, agreeable, or easy to accept. It moves toward the whole of a person, not just the curated fragments that are most comfortable to reveal. Within every individual exists a polarity, the light that seeks expression and the shadow that longs to remain unseen. To honor only one is to deny the reality of the other. The light is what is readily shared. It is kindness, generosity, intelligence, warmth, the qualities that invite approval and belonging. It is what one learns to develop and present to the world in order to be accepted. But the shadow is no less real. It consists of fear, insecurity, envy, anger, doubt, the aspects shaped by experience, often hidden beneath layers of defense. These elements are not signs of failure. They are expressions of the psyche that have not yet been fully understood or integrated. Love that attaches itself only to the light becomes fragile. It depends on consistency, on the maintenance of a certain image. The moment the shadow appears, as it inevitably does, such love begins to withdraw, to question, to retreat. It may attempt to correct or suppress what it cannot accept, mistaking control for care. In doing so, it creates distance rather than connection. To honor both light and shadow is to approach another person without the illusion that they must be flawless in order to be worthy. It is a willingness to remain present even when confronted with discomfort. This does not mean accepting harm or abandoning discernment. It means recognizing that complexity is inherent, and that growth does not occur through rejection, but through awareness. When someone feels that only their light is welcome, they begin to fragment themselves. They show what is safe and conceal what feels unacceptable. Over time, this division creates tension, a quiet sense of disconnection, not only from others, but from oneself. True love resists this fragmentation. It invites integration. It creates a space where the shadow can be acknowledged without immediate judgment or dismissal. In such a space, honesty becomes possible. There is less need for performance, less fear of exposure. One can admit to uncertainty, to contradiction, to imperfection. This does not weaken the connection. It strengthens it because it is built on what is real rather than what is idealized. The presence of someone who can witness both aspects without turning away has a subtle but powerful effect. It encourages self-reflection, not through pressure, but through acceptance. The shadow, when no longer denied, begins to lose its unconscious grip. It becomes something that can be examined, understood, and gradually transformed. This kind of love does not seek to eliminate darkness, nor does it glorify it. It simply refuses to pretend that it does not exist. It sees the full landscape of a person and chooses to remain engaged with it, not out of obligation, but out of a deeper recognition that wholeness is not found in perfection, but in the integration of all that one is to be seen is often imagined as something gentle, affirming, and reassuring. Yet in its truest form, it asks for something far more demanding than the pursuit of perfection. It requires the willingness to stand without concealment, to exist without carefully constructed defenses, and to allow another person to encounter what is real rather than what is refined. Perfection is, in many ways, a strategy. It is an attempt to secure acceptance by eliminating the possibility of rejection. It creates an image that appears complete, controlled, and free of contradiction. But this image, no matter how convincing, is inherently fragile. It depends on constant maintenance, on the suppression of anything that might disrupt its coherence. In this effort, much of what is authentic is pushed aside, hidden beneath the surface in order to preserve the illusion. Courage moves in the opposite direction. It does not attempt to eliminate vulnerability, it allows it. To be seen requires exposing the parts of oneself that are uncertain, unfinished, or unresolved. It involves revealing not only strengths but also fears, doubts, and inconsistencies. These are the very elements that perfection seeks to conceal, yet they are also the elements that make genuine connection possible. There is a risk inherent in this exposure. Once something is revealed, it cannot be entirely withdrawn. It exists in the awareness of another, subject to their perception, their interpretation. This uncertainty often leads to hesitation, to the instinct to retreat behind what feels safer and more controlled. The impulse to protect oneself is not without reason, but it can also prevent the experience of being truly known. Being seen is not about presenting everything at once, nor is it about abandoning all boundaries. It is a gradual process, one that unfolds through moments of honesty and openness. Each moment requires a decision, to remain guarded or to allow a glimpse beyond the surface. Courage is found in choosing openness despite the possibility of discomfort. What makes this especially difficult is the internal resistance that arises. It is not only the fear of how others might respond, but also the confrontation with one's own self-perception. To be seen by another often means seeing oneself more clearly. It disrupts familiar narratives, challenges assumptions, and brings attention to aspects that may have been ignored or denied. Yet within this challenge lies a quiet transformation. When one is seen and not rejected, something begins to shift. The need to uphold perfection loses its urgency. The self becomes less divided, less constrained by the pressure to appear a certain way. There is a growing capacity to exist as one is, rather than as one believes they must be. Courage, in this sense, is not dramatic or forceful. It is subtle, persistent, and often quiet. It appears in the decision to speak honestly when silence would be easier, to remain present when withdrawal feels safer, to allow oneself to be known even when certainty is absent. There is a certain familiarity in the act of seeking love. It is active, outward, and often driven by a sense of longing that feels easier to understand than to question. To seek is to move, to pursue, to imagine what might be found in another person. It carries a sense of purpose, even control, because it allows one to remain in motion, focused on the possibility of connection, rather than the reality of being known. Receiving love operates on a different axis. It does not require pursuit, but permission. It is not about finding someone, but allowing oneself to be found. This distinction, though subtle, reveals a deeper challenge. To receive is to become still enough to accept what is being offered without immediately filtering it through doubt, suspicion, or deflection. For many, seeking love feels natural because it aligns with familiar patterns of effort and validation. One can present desirable qualities, refine behavior, and attempt to shape how they are perceived. There is a sense of participation in the outcome, as though love can be influenced or earned through the right combination of actions. Even rejection in this context can be rationalized, adjusted for, or pursued again with a different approach. Receiving love, however, disrupts this structure. It introduces something that cannot be controlled in the same way. When love is offered sincerely, without manipulation or condition, it does not demand performance. It does not require one to prove their worth in the moment. Instead, it confronts the internal beliefs that question whether such an offering is deserved. This is where resistance often emerges. It may appear as skepticism, a tendency to downplay or dismiss what is given. Compliments are deflected, care is questioned, intentions are analyzed for hidden motives. These reactions are not always conscious, but they reveal an underlying discomfort with acceptance. It is easier to remain in the role of the one who seeks than to transition into the one who receives. Receiving love requires trust, not only in the other person, but in one's own capacity to accept without distortion. It involves allowing positive regard to exist without immediately qualifying it or preparing for its disappearance. This can feel unfamiliar, especially for those who have learned to associate love with conditions, inconsistency, or withdrawal. There is also a vulnerability in receiving that differs from seeking. To seek is to maintain a certain distance, a degree of separation that protects against full exposure. To receive is to allow that distance to close. It invites the possibility of being affected, of being changed by what is given. This openness can feel destabilizing because it challenges the self-protective structures that have been built over time. Yet within this openness lies a deeper form of connection. When love is received without resistance, it begins to settle, to take root in a way that is not dependent on constant reassurance or pursuit. It becomes something that can be experienced rather than chased, something that exists in the present rather than in anticipation. There is a common misconception that love, in its most powerful form, reshapes a person into something entirely new. It is often imagined as a force that replaces identity, dissolves individuality, or demands transformation in order to sustain itself. Under this belief, change becomes synonymous with loss, as though to evolve within love is to abandon what was once authentic. Yet this view arises from a misunderstanding of what real love does and how it operates within the human psyche. Real love does not seek to erase. It does not impose a foreign structure onto a person's identity, nor does it require conformity to an external ideal. Instead, it brings clarity. It exposes the layers that have been accumulated over time, beliefs, defenses, and patterns that may have once served a purpose but no longer reflect the deeper truth of who someone is. These layers often go unnoticed, mistaken for identity itself, simply because they have been present for so long. Illusions are not inherently false in an obvious sense. They are convincing precisely because they contain elements of truth, shaped and reinforced by experience. A person may come to believe they are only valuable when they are needed, or only lovable when they are agreeable, or only safe when they remain guarded. These beliefs form a kind of internal narrative, one that organizes behavior and perception in a way that feels coherent, even if it is limiting. When real love enters this structure, it does not attack these illusions directly. It does not argue or attempt to dismantle them through force. Instead, it introduces a different experience, one that does not align with the existing narrative. When someone is valued without being needed, accepted without being agreeable, or approached without intrusion, the old beliefs begin to lose their certainty. They are not forcibly removed. They are gradually seen for what they are. This process can feel disorienting. As illusions begin to dissolve, there is often a temporary sense of instability. The familiar ways of understanding oneself no longer hold the same authority. Yet what replaces them is not immediately clear. It can create a tension between what has always been assumed and what is now being experienced. In this tension, there is a choice, whether to retreat into the familiar or to remain present with the uncertainty. Identity, in its deeper sense, is not constructed from these illusions. It exists beneath them, less rigid, more fluid, capable of adapting without losing its essence. Real love supports this underlying identity by allowing it to emerge without distortion. It does not demand that a person become something else. It removes the pressure to be something they are not. What changes, then, is not the core of the individual, but the structures that obscure it. The need to perform, to defend, to conform to outdated beliefs begins to weaken. In their place, there is a greater alignment between inner experience and outward expression. This alignment is not imposed from outside. It arises naturally when the conditions for honesty and acceptance are present. In this way, real love acts less like a force of transformation and more like a process of revelation. It does not construct a new self, but uncovers the one that was always there, waiting beneath layers of adaptation and misunderstanding. There is a persistent tendency to search outward for what feels missing within. It takes many forms, seeking validation, approval, connection, or a sense of worth that appears more accessible when reflected back through another person. In this movement outward, it is easy to assume that what is longed for originates outside, that it must be given, earned, or discovered through someone else's recognition. Yet the experience of encountering something meaningful in another person often reveals more than it seems. When you perceive depth, sincerity, or a sense of sacredness in someone else's presence, what you are responding to is not entirely foreign. There is a resonance, a subtle recognition that arises because something within you is capable of meeting it. Without that inner correspondence, the perception itself would not fully form. The qualities that move you most deeply, those that feel rare or profound, tend to reflect capacities that already exist within, though they may not be fully acknowledged. A person who values honesty will recognize it with greater clarity in others. Someone attuned to emotional depth will feel it more distinctly when it is present. This is not coincidence. It is an indication of an inner alignment that has yet to be fully claimed. The difficulty lies in accepting that what is recognized outwardly is also present inwardly. It can feel more comfortable to attribute meaning and value to another person than to oneself. Doing so maintains a certain distance, preserving the belief that one must reach or strive in order to access what feels significant. This creates a subtle imbalance, where the other becomes elevated and the self diminished. When this pattern continues, it can lead to dependence on external affirmation. The sense of worth becomes contingent on how one is seen, how one is treated, or how one is valued by others. This dependence can create instability, as it places something essential outside of one's own control. It also obscures the reality that the capacity for meaning, depth, and connection is not something that can be transferred from one person to another. Recognizing that what you seek already exists within does not eliminate the importance of relationships. It changes the way they are experienced. Instead of approaching others as sources of completion, there is a shift toward mutual recognition. The connection becomes less about filling a void and more about reflecting and amplifying what is already present in both individuals. This realization is not immediate. It unfolds gradually, often through moments where external validation no longer satisfies in the same way, or where the absence of it forces a deeper inquiry. In these moments, there is an opportunity to turn inward, not in isolation, but in awareness, to observe what has been overlooked, to question what has been assumed, and to begin recognizing value without requiring constant confirmation. The sacredness you perceive in another person does not diminish when it is acknowledged within yourself. It becomes more grounded, less dependent on circumstance, and more integrated into your own sense of being. What was once sought externally begins to feel accessible, not as something newly acquired, but as something remembered, something that had been present all along, waiting to be recognized without hesitation or doubt.